Laurel didn't even say hello. Just opened the door wide enough for me to see the tension in her face and the crinkle in her nose. He smells. Honestly, Mom, why do you let that mutt in the house? I don't want him around Tate. He's filthy. I shifted the plate of oatmeal cookies in one hand, gently tugging Waffles' leash with the other. He wagged his tail anyway, always hopeful. I gave a polite smile and backed off the porch before she could close the door on us both. Back home, I set the cookies on the counter and unhooked Waffles by the kitchen sink. He padded to his favorite rug, circled once, and flopped down with a sigh. His fur still held the faint scent of pine and old carpet, nothing a good brushing couldn't fix. But I knew Laurel didn't care about facts. She cared about appearances. Later that afternoon, I heard the soft jingle of the gate latch, followed by quiet feet on my back steps. I didn't need to look. Tate always came the same way, through the gap in the hedges, past the rusted garden frog, and straight into my kitchen, like he belonged. "Hi, Grandma," he said, breathless, cheeks pink. "Can I give Waffles the peanut butter again?" I nodded, pulling the jar from the cupboard. He sat cross-legged on the floor, while Waffles licked gently at his fingers, his little giggles bouncing off the tile. Tate didn't care that Waffles had a patchy ear, or that his tail sometimes knocked things over. He just loved him, the way kids do, without condition, without history. I sat at the table and watched them, hands curled around a mug of lukewarm tea. I didn't take a picture. I didn't post about it. I just sat there, soaking in the soft rhythm of a child and a dog who trusted each other in a world that often didn't. The sun dipped low behind the hills, and I heard Laurel's voice next door, sharp and calling. Tate stood up reluctantly, Waffles still nudging his palm. I walked him back through the hedges, neither of us saying much. The next morning, Laurel sent a message. Short, direct. From now on, no dog. Not in my yard, not near my kid. No greeting, no explanation. Just that. So the next time I visited, I left Waffles at home. He stood at the gate, tail wagging uncertainly, watching me cross the street without him. I told myself he'd nap while I was gone, maybe sniff around the yard or chase a squirrel. But as I stepped up to Laurel's door, something in my chest tugged like a missed note. Tate opened the door before his mother could. He grinned at first, then frowned. "Where's Waffles?" "He's resting," I said, brushing his hair from his forehead. Tate's face drooped and he walked back into the house without another word. Laurel handed me his small backpack, barely meeting my eyes. "He's been cranky." "No screens today?" She didn't say thank you. We walked back together, me and Tate, in silence. Once inside, he slumped onto the couch with the heaviness of someone twice his size. I asked if he wanted a snack. He shrugged. I turned on the kettle and waited, hoping his quiet would lift with the warmth. But it didn't. "Mommy says Waffles is gross," he said suddenly. His voice was small, unsure. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain the way people confuse fear for cleanliness or control for safety. Later, after peanut butter crackers and a few pages of a worn picture book, I found him curled up on the rug by the back door. Waffles had slipped in again, probably through the side gate I hadn't latched. They were tangled together, child and dog, their breathing slow and synced, like tide and moon. I didn't take a photo. Didn't speak. I sat down beside them, cross-legged on the floor, and let my hand rest on Waffles' back. That's how Laurel found us when she returned. She stood in the doorway, lips tight, arms crossed. I gently nudged Waffles up and helped Tate into his shoes. Laurel didn't speak as she led him away, and I didn't follow. I just watched until the corner of her coat disappeared behind the hedge. The knock came hard and fast. 3 times. No pause. I opened the door to Laurel's face, pale in sharp panic, already swallowing the anger she hadn't yet spoken. "Is he here?" she gasped. My stomach dropped. "Tate." She nodded. "I came back from the store. He wasn't inside. Back door was wide open. His shoes are gone." I turned behind me, calling for Waffles. Nothing. No collar jingling, no paws on the tile. I walked through the house, checked the yard under the porch. Laurel followed me out, her voice breaking as she shouted his name. We checked every fence line. Neighbors came out with flashlights and jackets. One brought his drone. Another started down the street, calling into bushes, under porches, into parked cars. I ran to the park. Laurel ran to the trail behind the school. The sky turned gold, then orange, then purple. Tate's voice never came. The wind shifted cold. By the time the police arrived, Laurel was pacing barefoot in the driveway. Her hands were shaking. I tried to speak calmly, tried to keep her from unraveling. The officers asked the usual questions: description, last seen, any habits, hiding spots. He likes dogs, Laurel said quietly. And mud, and the woods. God, I should have locked the back. I stepped inside to get Tate's photo from the fridge for the report. That's when I saw it, Waffles' leash, still hanging by the door, untouched. I stood there, frozen, because Waffles never left the house without it. Not unless... I picked it up slowly, fingers brushing the clasp. It was clean. Not even a pull on the loop. My heart beat harder, not with fear, but something else. A pull in my chest, like recognition. Outside, Laurel shouted Tate's name again. Her voice was cracking now, hoarse and frantic. I stepped out and met her eyes. Waffles is gone too, I said. For a moment, she just stared. Then we both turned toward the woods at the edge of the street. The night filled with the hum of helicopters and the crackle of radios. Voices called Tate's name from every corner of the neighborhood. Dogs barked in the distance, but none of them were Waffles. Flashlights swept through backyards and ravines. The officers knocked on every door twice. No one had seen him. Laurel sat in the back of the cruiser with a blanket over her shoulders. But it wasn't Tate's. His was gone. Missing from his bed. He must have taken it with him, she said, staring at nothing. He never sleeps without it. I gave my statement to the officer, quietly answering each question with care. What time I'd last seen him. What Waffles usually did during the day. Whether there were cameras on my property. He wrote it all down. I offered to check the neighborhood trail again. He nodded. I walked back across the lawn just as Laurel stepped out of the cruiser. Her face was blotchy, her voice edged raw. Why wasn't your gate locked? She snapped. You always leave it open. He probably went there. You always let that stupid dog near him. Maybe that's what started this. I said nothing. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would help. She kept talking, but her voice broke midway. I watched as the panic behind her anger took over. Her hands shook. She sat down on the curb and pressed her palms to her face. I left her there and walked back home in the dark. My porch light flickered as I stepped inside. I didn't bother to turn on the others. Waffles' bed was still by the radiator. The bowl by the back door still had water in it. I sat beside the bed, running my hand across the indent his body had left. The house was quiet, too quiet, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I stayed there waiting for something. A noise, a bark, anything. But the silence held, and the leash still hung where I'd left it. The hours crawled, each one colder than the last. Somewhere between midnight and 2, the search teams trickled back. Flashlights dimmed. Walkie-talkies fell quiet. Their boots were heavy with mud and resignation. No sign, one officer said quietly at the door. We'll regroup at first light. I nodded. Laurel said nothing. She sat curled in the corner of my couch, her arms wrapped around her knees like they were the only thing holding her up. I brought her tea. She didn't touch it. Just rocked slowly, her eyes fixed on a point that didn't exist. I should have locked the door, she whispered once. I said nothing. I paced between windows. The wind howled. A tree groaned in the backyard. I checked the side gate twice, then 3 times. No sign of Waffles, no sign of Tate. By 4 a.m., even the wind had grown tired. Laurel had drifted into a shallow sleep, curled on her side shoes, still on. I sat in the kitchen, hands wrapped around the same mug I'd warmed 3 times, staring at the darkened backyard. Then scratch. Soft at first. Then again. A whine. I was on my feet before I knew it. Waffles stood at the back door, coated in mud sides, heaving water dripping from his fur. He looked up at me and barked, once sharp, urgent, then turned and took off down the yard. I didn't think. I didn't call Laurel. I didn't grab my phone. I grabbed the old raincoat from the hook and ran after him barefoot. The grass was wet and cold. Stones bit into my heels, but Waffles didn't stop. He darted through the open gate, past the neighbor's shed, into the trees. I kept up as best I could, heart pounding. Branches tore at my sleeves, and somewhere behind me, the sky began to turn a pale gray. He barked again, farther ahead now. Not frantic, just insistent, certain. I kept running, breath fogging in the cold, until I couldn't hear anything but his paws on the earth ahead of me. Waffles zigzagged through the trees, nose, low tail, stiff with purpose. Every few yards he stopped, looked back to be sure I was still coming, then barked once and pushed forward again. I followed, stumbling over roots and slick leaves, lungs burning in the damp morning air. When I reached the split in the trail, a set of headlights swung around the bend. A police SUV. I waved both arms and shouted. The vehicle skidded to a halt. "He's here," I gasped. "Waffles found something. Follow him." The officer nodded and threw the door open. I climbed in, heart hammering. Waffles was already disappearing into the brush. The SUV bumped over a rough maintenance path deeper into the woods. Then the officer stopped. "There," I said, pointing through the trees. We got out and followed Waffles on foot. The ground dipped sharply soft with mud and moss. Waffles let out a low whine, then began pawing at the earth. And then I saw him. Tate. Curled in a shallow hollow beneath a fallen log, his blanket clutched to his chest. His face was pale, streaked with dirt, eyes blinking slowly. His ankle was twisted oddly beneath him, but he was breathing. "Oh, God," I whispered. The officer radioed for backup. I dropped to my knees beside him. Waffles stood guard pressed against Tate's side, his fur matted with dried blood and mud. His flank rose and fell, exhausted but steady. He'd been there all night, holding heat, digging space, staying. Laurel's screams split the woods as she stumbled down the trail, flanked by 2 more officers. She nearly collapsed when she reached us. "Oh, my baby, oh, Tate." Tate opened his eyes, too tired to cry. "Waffles stayed with me," he whispered. Laurel pressed her hand to her mouth. Her whole body shook. Paramedics arrived seconds later. They checked his pulse, wrapped his ankle, lifted him gently onto a stretcher. I looked down at Waffles. He didn't move, just watched calm now, like his job was done. They carried Tate up the hill, and for the first time in hours, we followed. The next morning, I was on the porch before the sun had fully cleared the treetops. I hadn't slept much. Waffles lay at my feet, bandaged and drowsy, his breathing slow and even. I had a blanket draped over him and a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands. The screen door creaked behind me, but it wasn't mine. Laurel was crossing the street, holding 2 cups. She moved carefully, like the ground might break under her. She didn't knock, just sat on the step beside me and held 1 cup out. I took it with quiet hands. We sat like that for a while, letting the silence settle in the space that had so often been filled with tension. "I thought I was protecting Tate," she said finally, voice low. "But I think I was just controlling everything I was afraid of." I said nothing. I didn't need to. She looked down at Waffles, still curled on the porch boards, One paw bandaged a patch of fur shaved for stitches. Slowly, she reached out and brushed her hand through his coat. "He saved my son," she said. Waffles opened one eye and gave a soft huff, his tail thumping once against the floor. Not rushed, just steady. Laurel blinked hard and looked away. I saw her mouth move around words she didn't quite say. We stayed on the porch through the steam of the coffee. After a while, she asked if Tate could come by later. "He wants to see Waffles. Says he has something for him." I nodded. "He's welcome whenever he wants." Laurel didn't reply right away. She just sat there sipping coffee the early light, softening the lines around her eyes. And for once, she didn't mention germs, or rules, or fences. She just stayed. When she stood to leave, she bent to scratch behind Waffles' ear. He leaned into her hand. She smiled, not wide, but real. Then she crossed back to her house, and I stayed where I was watching the morning stretch open. 2 days after they brought Tate home, I heard the sound of metal clinking just past the hedge. I stepped into the yard still in my house slippers and saw Laurel kneeling by the old gate between our properties. A hammer sat beside her, and one side of the latch was already gone. She didn't look up. "It's in the way," she said. I didn't argue. I just nodded and returned to the kitchen. That morning, Tate asked if he could have breakfast at my house with Waffles. Laurel helped him across the yard, his little ankle still wrapped one crutch under his arm. Waffles was waiting by the porch step like he already knew. Tate hugged him tightly before even saying hello to me. "He missed me," he whispered. I didn't say it out loud, but I think Waffles missed him more than any of us could understand. I baked blueberry scones, even though I hadn't in years. Laurel used to love them back when she still let herself have warm things. I added a little extra sugar just in case. We ate on the porch. Tate dipped his scone in milk and broke off tiny pieces for Waffles beneath the table. Waffles, ever gentle, took each one with care, never once making a mess. Laurel sat beside me. She didn't check her watch or answer emails. She just sat. Every now and then she glanced toward Tate and Waffles and smiled. No one said the word dirty, or smelly, or filthy. Only thank you. After the dishes were cleared, Laurel helped Tate lie down with a blanket beside Waffles on the rug just inside the door. He dozed quickly, one hand resting on Waffles' back. Laurel stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of their breaths. She didn't say much, but when she looked at me, there was something different in her face, softer around the eyes, less certain around the mouth. And when she asked if she could come by again tomorrow, I told her she didn't need to ask. That evening, I walked across the yard with Waffles beside me, his steps slower now, but still sure. The back door to Laurel's was open. The porch light glowed soft against the siding. Inside the house smelled like roasted chicken and sage. She'd set out 2 extra plates, one for me and a smaller one with bits of unseasoned meat for Waffles. He waited politely by my feet until Tate came running in his crutch, tossed aside with a thunk. "Come on, Waffles," he said, already pulling the dog toward the living room. There beside the fireplace was a new dog bed, big, soft, clearly unused until now. Tate grabbed his favorite blanket from the couch and spread it out over the cushion, then patted the spot until Waffles stepped onto it and curled up. His tail thumped once. Laurel lit the fire without a word and poured cider into 3 mugs. She handed one to me and settled into the armchair, watching her son tuck himself against Waffles' side like he'd never known a world where that wasn't allowed. Tate rested his head gently on Waffles' ribs, his eyes fluttering as the heat of the fire and the steady rhythm of breath lulled him toward sleep. I didn't speak. Neither did Laurel. We just sat in the flickering quiet. Every so often, Laurel looked at them, her son and the dog she once banned from her home, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was young. Not regret, not even guilt. just the slow arrival of something like peace. When Tate finally drifted off, still tucked into Waffles' side, Laurel didn't move to carry him to bed. She just pulled the throw from the couch and laid it over both of them. The fire crackled. The room held its breath. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the kind of silence that doesn't hurt, the kind that lets you breathe. The log settled with a hiss of steam, and I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth carry us into the night. The seasons turned as they always do. Waffles moved a little slower with each one. His hips stiffened in the mornings. His naps grew longer, but he still rose when Tate called. Always. Tate grew taller, steadier on his feet. The crutch disappeared. The blanket changed from a daily companion to something folded at the foot of his bed. But Waffles remained his constant by the front door, at his side, on the porch, under the kitchen table during storms. Something had shifted that day in the woods, and it never shifted back. Laurel stopped by more often now. Sometimes she knocked. Sometimes she didn't. She brought marrow bones from the butcher, a new rope toy, a ball that squeaked too loud but made Tate laugh every time. She didn't bring opinions. Just presence. I didn't say much when she came. I'd make coffee or open the window a crack to let the sun in. And when she talked about work or school projects or how Tate wanted to try piano, I just listened. Sometimes I'd glance at the dog bed by the heater, now slightly flattened from years of loyalty, and see Laurel watching him too. Tate started calling Waffles his best friend. Said it once in passing like it was the most natural truth in the world. Laurel heard him. She didn't correct him. Didn't say dog or pet. Just nodded, the corner of her mouth twitching with something like humility. Because Waffles wasn't just the mutt they didn't want. Not just the rescue I'd brought home from the shelter, after losing the only man who ever truly made space for my quiet. He was the one who stayed. When the doors were closed. When the words got hard. When the world tilted and no one knew where to put their fear, he stayed. Now when Tate tells stories at the dinner table, Waffles is always in them. Not as a character, but as a given. Like air. Like light. Like love that never needed permission to be true.